Hello, everyone, and welcome to Poem of the Day. Today is Wednesday, July the 30th, 2025, and we're going to go back into the 20th century for the poem today. And it's a rather challenging poem and one of the longer poems that we've had in the 2 weeks that we've been doing these morning videos. The poem that I'm going to read is called The Broken Tower by Hart. And I've only read Hart Crane's The Bridge, which is a longer poem in several stanzas. And by longer, I mean it's pages long. A very challenging, dense, complex poem. And there's a similar challenge and complexity to The Broken Tower, but I think that it's a bit more approachable. And as always, I will say some things about the poem, but as is especially the case here, this is a poem that needs far more attention than it's going to get in a video like this. So hopefully just kind of um, beginning to work with some of the verses can inspire some of those thoughts. Hart Crane was an American poet, and he died by suicide when he was 33 years old. He had gone, I think, to Mexico on a Guggenheim Fellowship and was sort of commissioned to write an epic poem about Cortez, I think it was. But instead, he sort of spent his time writing these really complex, beautiful lyrics that he left when he died. On the way back home, he was aboard a ship with his new muse and love. It was his first heterosexual relationship, who was the wife of his friend. And he jumped overboard to his death just shy of his 33rd birthday. So he had a pretty sad and troubling and tumultuous life, short life. And this poem, The Broken Tower, as far as I know, is the last one that he wrote that was published. And many critics, primary among them being Harold Bloom, read it as a sort of death poem. So with that in mind, this is from 1932. It is Hart Crane's The Broken Tower. The bell rope that gathers God at dawn dispatches me as though I dropped down the knell of a spent day, to wander the cathedral lawn from pit to crucifix, feet chill on steps from hell. Have you not heard? Have you not seen that core of shadows in the tower, whose shoulders sway antiphonal carrions launched before the stars are caught and hived in the sun's ray? The bells, I say, the bells break down their tower, and swing I know not where. Their tongues engrave, membrane through marrow, my long scattered score of broken intervals, and I, their sexton slave. Oval encyclicals and canyons heaping the impasse high with choir, banked voices slain, pagodas, campaniles with reveals, outleaping, terraced echoes prostrate on the plain. And so it was I entered the broken world, to trace the visionary company of love, its voice an instant in the wind, I know not whither hurled, but not for long to hold each desperate choice. My word I poured, but was it cognate, scored of that tribunal monarch of the air whose thigh embronzes earth, strikes crystal word in wounds pledged once to hope, cleft to despair? The steep encroachments of my blood left me no answer. Could blood hold such a lofty tower as flings the question true? Or is it she, whose sweet mortality stirs latent power? And through whose pulse I hear, counting the strokes, my veins recall and add, revived and sure, the angelus of wars my chest evokes. What I hold healed, original now, and pure. And builds, within, a tower that is not stone can jacket heaven, but slip of pebbles, visible wings of silence sewn in azure circles, widening as they dip. The matrix of the heart lift down the eye that shrines the quiet lake and swells a tower. The commodious, tall decorum of that sky unseals her earth and lifts love in its shower. Wow, that's a uh, complex, charged, and highly emotional poem. I'm going to spend a couple minutes just to talk about some things that I think it evokes, some things that I think it suggests, and hopefully that can shed some light on parts of the poem for you. The poem's 40 lines long. It is 10 stanzas, each with 4 lines, so 10 quatrains, and with a rather simple rhyme scheme of A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, and so on throughout the quatrains. This seemingly simple structure, though, hides a rhythmic inconsistency and a rhythmic complexity. There are iambs throughout the poem, substituted in with trochees throughout the poem. There are caesuras, mostly with dashes in the middle of lines that interrupt the speaker's thought, cause pauses. There are questions that are 4 lines long. And perhaps the biggest challenge, but also the biggest maybe key to unlocking some parts of this poem, is the conceit of the broken tower, which for me immediately suggests an allusion to the Tower of Babel. This idea of humans trying to construct with the materials of the earth and with their own ambitions and talents something that can reach into the sky and commune with God. And I don't know that Crane is specifically referring to that in order to talk about something religious, but rather to talk about something sacred and something transcendent. I think that this poem, the conceit of the tower, is that the tower suggests his artistic expression or his soul more broadly, and that it's something that from the beginning is broken. He's feeling broken and disconnected and fractured on the inside. We begin the poem with the bells already ringing, and they're sort of ringing out of control, right? It says that these are bells that gather God at dawn and dispatch him down throughout the day. So it's something that he believes, I think, highly in his ability as a poet to evoke something symbolic or something, outside of the realm of the real and the everyday, but that he has to descend from this tower, um, where his feet are chill on the steps of hell. And so to me, that suggests somebody whose psychology is so wounded that even their past works are sort of haunting them. He asks in the second stanza the rhetorical question about, have you not heard, have you not seen the core of shadows in the tower? And core of shadows, this could refer to his past works, but again, it has this imagery of being haunted, right? Of a sort of gothic presence that is unsettling to the speaker. He refers in this third stanza to himself as the sexton slave, and the sexton being the one who rings the church bell. But here doing it not really to announce the beginning of a service and the joyful presence of God, but rather doing it out of compulsion, right? Compulsion to the bells. In the middle parts of the poem, he reflects on his entering into the broken world and trying to write about love, trying to pour out his interiority, but feeling like in stanza 6 that his words were merely cognates. They were merely connected. They weren't something that actually spoke to things like the Almighty. We have word in here with a capital W, right? The tribunal monarch. And the next stanza as well is an entirely made up of a rhetorical question. And there he begins to ask, if the inspiration comes within his own blood or exterior, from this muse he has now, whose sweet mortality stirs latent power. And it's at that point, I think, that the poem takes another turn for the last 3 stanzas. The tone seems to shift from dread and anxiety to something that is more celebratory and promising. He talks about hearing a new pulse and a new stroke that is kind of riling up his veins, right? Reviving his veins there. And this has a healing power, something that feels in him original now and pure. Um, the second to last stanza speaks to a rebuilding of a tower, but this time one that's not stone, one that is of pebbles, right? And that seems as though it's essentially the same material, being rock, but I think the idea of it being pebbles is something that is smaller and more day to day and more laborious and painstaking in its discipline, but not as largely gestural as something like lifting a stone would be. And within that, it sounds to me like his new tower is built upon a consciousness of the present and the everyday rather than these large, meaningful gestures of writing kind of grand aesthetic statements. And the final stanza, then we have his tower rising and finding a place among the sky, one that lifts love, it says, right? The shrine, the quiet lake enswells a tower. The commodious tall decorum of that sky unseals her earth and lifts love in its shower. So by the end of the poem, he's moved from this tremendous kind of dread and anxiety about his past work to a place, it seems, of peace and integrity with the things that he has done and with the kind of letting go of worrying about his past work and instead focusing on smaller things and focusing on love. I think that makes it all the more tragic that this is read as his sort of death poem, or that it's his final poem that he gave us before he died by suicide. Because not to read the poet too much in as the speaker, but there's always that temptation. It sounds like there's this moment of hope and this moment of growth away from being tortured on the interior near the end of the poem. And I find the ending to be uplifting and earned in a really beautiful way. So that's our first foray into Hart Crane, and hopefully we will return to him later in this series. Maybe a little bit heavy for the morning today, but I do think it's important for us also to engage with the poems that speak to some of the darker and more melancholy aspects of life as well, and to wrestle with those and find ways in which the poetic expression of those can relate to, connect, and help us through those. So I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day, and may peace be with you all.